So, learning how to play drums without a drum set. So I mentioned in the introduction video that some people feel that you have to have a drum set to learn how to play drums. And I also mentioned that that's a myth and that you can learn how to play drums without owning a drum set. How do I know that? Because I did it, all right? So how did I go about doing it? And how can you go about doing it if you can't afford one? So I'm about to share some ideas with you and get you to sort of think about drumming from possibly a bit of a different perspective than you might be coming at it from. And hopefully this will help if you're stuck in a place where you either can't have a drum kit or you just can't afford one. All right, so let's get into it. So I'll give you a bit of insight into how I personally went about learning to play drums without owning a drum set. So to understand how I did it, you've got to understand where I came from. So when I was about 15, 16, I was really interested in music. I was listening to lots of music at that particular point in my life, and I just decided I wanted to learn how to play drums. Now at that particular point, I had no idea how to go about doing that. I just said, I want to learn how to play drums. Luckily enough, at the time, I had a friend whose stepfather was a guitarist in a band, and he knew somebody who could teach drums. And the town I was living in was a little town called Broken Hill, or some people call it a city, and it had a population of about 19,000. Not a hub for music at all, so it's not like there were drum teachers on every corner or a big music school that I could go to or something like that. So I was introduced to this drum teacher and I had 4 or 5 lessons. Now my family wasn't well off at all and I couldn't afford ongoing lessons. I think I only had about 5 or 6, but that was enough to get me started. So I would go around to the drum teacher's house, and out in her shed she had a drum set, and I learnt some basic things on that drum kit, and after the lesson I was just sent home and I didn't have anything to practice on, and I had no money to actually buy myself a drum set or anything, so I was just left to my own devices. So after that 5 or 6 lessons, I was kind of obsessed. I really wanted to do this because I had a bit of a breakthrough, and the basic rhythms that I was shown at lessons I heard in a few songs, and I thought, I can do this. This is really cool. I can actually play these rhythms. So I then started collecting books and stuff on the subject and started trying to teach myself, and that's really where I got started. Now, how did I go about applying that material and the lessons that I had without a drum set? Well, obviously I did, and this is how you can too. So when I was having my first few drum lessons, or the only drum lessons that I had when I first started, I very quickly realized that the problem for me, and the problem for everybody when they're learning how to play drums, is coordination. And that simply comes down to, can you move the correct limb at the correct time? So if the sticking pattern, for example, was right, left, could you actually go right, left, or would you go right, left, right by mistake? And things like that. So it really comes down to your brain's ability to control your body. That's really all it's about. The drum set just makes the sound once that movement has happened. So the difference between this and this is the fact that there's a drum there. That's really all there is. So when I first started, having that little bit of an epiphany, if you want to call it that, made me realize that if I just practiced moving my limbs at the right time, I would eventually learn how to hit the right drum at the right time. So, and I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. So one of the first things that I was shown, and the first things that most drummers are shown, is what's referred to as a basic rock beat, which, if you're not familiar with it, is this. Now, when I was first shown that, I couldn't play it that well. I did what most beginners do, and I did the whole and I couldn't get my limbs to operate the way I wanted them to, and I made lots of mistakes. And one of the biggest mistakes that you'll make is things like you'll hit all three at the same time, or you'll hit, when you're meant to hit with your right hand and your right foot, you'll hit with your, two hands instead, things like that. So I realized pretty quickly that the problem for me wasn't here. It didn't have anything to do with the drum set. It had everything to do with my ability to control my arms and legs and have them play the way I wanted them to, or the way that I was being asked to. So it was really a physical training thing, not a music thing at that early point. All right, so once you've realized that, then we can get into, well, how do you train yourself how to do that? So here's some ways that you can go about doing it. Okay, so to show you this concept, let's start with a few exercises. So the first thing we'll try is just a simple basic rock beat. So we've obviously got the bass drum, the snare drum and the hi-hat. They're our three instruments that we use for this. So this is our basic rock beat. Okay, we could play it on the ride cymbal if we wanted to. Or we could try something a bit harder. Let's jump down to, say, exercise 7, which has a few extra bass drums in it, and we will also swap from the hi-hat to the ride cymbal when we play it. So here's exercise 7. Alright, so we've got our basic rock beat and our variation of our basic rock beat, or exercise 7 as I called it, because that's what it is on the page. Let's take that from the drum set and apply it to something else, assuming that we don't have a drum kit to practice on. Okay, so gone is our drum set. We're going to pretend that we don't have one. So what is this stuff? So what I've done is I've gone and grabbed 3 items that I think will work. We've got our wheelie bin, or our garbage bin. We've got another small sort of household bin with a flip top lid. Not that that's going to be useful, but that's what it is. And here we've got a furniture trolley for moving fridges and stuff. So what is this replicating? So this is going to be our hi-hat. This is going to be our snare drum. It's a little bit low, but it'll do the job. And we're going to hit this as our ride cymbal. Our bass drum is just going to be us tapping our foot on the floor, or if you wanted to, you could just drop your foot if you wanted to. So let's start with exercise 1, which is our basic rock beat, which I've just stuck on top of the bin there. Okay, you don't need a music stand. So let's try it. Now if you want to play it on the ride cymbal. Let's go for something a bit more complex. Let's try rhythm 7 on the page, which has a few extra bass drums in it. It's as simple as that. Now, you can get as complex as you want. Okay. Obviously, the more comfortable you get with the equipment, the better it'll be. And you could swap things out. You might think, well, this is too low, which I personally think it is, you might find something else that's more suitable. So I used to practice with on the end of my bed, and used to get all my pillows and pack them up on one side. So as I had sort of hi-hats and snare drum. The snare drum was the mattress, and the pillows all piled up was the hi-hat. And my foot thumping on the floor was the bass drum. I didn't have a ride cymbal. I just pretended that I had one, and I literally just mimed it. Now, this leads me to another interesting little thing. Technically, you don't need this equipment. If you know where the cymbals and stuff are, you could just mime it and then just get used to those maneuvers. And then even with your drums, if you got a crash, China, okay, whatever equipment that you decide that you want to have, you can mime those movements. As long as you know in your head where they are, it works. So it's just a matter of you having a bit of faith in that and just doing the work, and you'll eventually learn how to play. So when it comes to snare drum orientated stuff, we're talking rudiments, double stroke rolls, press rolls, slams, drags, all that sort of stuff. I'm going to sound weird when I say this, but I'm going to suggest an old brick. So I found an old brick in the garden today, and I cleaned it off. And old bricks work really well for doing snare drum stuff. How did I find this out? Well, I actually used to practice on an old broken house brick years ago when I first started. There was an old brick that had come out of the front step of the front veranda of my house. So I polished it off and tried it, and it worked. So if you've got press roll stuff, like double stroke stuff, flams, drags, all that sort of stuff can be done on a broken house brick, or an old house brick. It doesn't have to be broken. You might have a perfectly good one. So okay, so that's one way that you can go about practicing your rudimental snare drumming. And if you notice, it's also jacked up the height a little bit more. So now you might feel more comfortable with the height of your snare drum. So some ideas. If you don't have an old brick, anything that's a hard surface. So maybe you can find an old chopping block or an old piece of wood in the shed, or a tree stump. You know, maybe you've got a fireplace and there's pieces of wood that your family uses. Maybe you can take one of those and clean it off and use that. Use your imagination. Come up with something, anything. You could probably practice on a hard surface like this. Let me try. Yep, so I can get the rebound out of that. So here's another weird one that I found. The sole of your shoe. Why? Because it's rubber. Okay, so if you search around, you can find all sorts of things. It's just a matter of you using your imagination, and if you really want to do it, you'll find a way. So hopefully this little lesson has helped you get some ideas on how you can tackle the problem of not having a drum set if you don't have one. Just to complete my own little story, it took me about 18 months to get my first little drum kit, and it was a little entry-level one. And I had that drum set for quite some time, quite a few years before I ever managed to get any money to upgrade or get a better one. Now I'm in the very lucky position that I've got 3 or 4 drum sets. This is just one of them, and probably one of the cheaper ones I've got. So, alright, well, good luck with it, and I'll see you in another lesson.